Welcome back to the studio. I am Guru Kathryn, founder of Geode Blockchain and guide for your personal and spiritual journey. And today I want to talk about what people have been talking about this week, which is Uniswap having received a Wells notice from the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, here in the United States. And for those not familiar with the SEC and how that works in the crypto space, and I am by no means a security or regulatory expert. I am not. But what that means, and we all know it, is that they are about to be sued by the SEC. And that's not fun. So that is the news that's on everybody's mind. I want to come at this from a perspective of where I actually think I can contribute something unique and interesting. And that's two ways. I want to zoom out from this story to the 10,000 foot level and look at kind of the overarching trend and where that's going, where this is just a part of a larger trend. And then I want to actually zoom in and dive into why people do what they do in terms of the chairman, Gary Gensler himself, some of the other members who are, he's not in there alone, guys. There's a whole group of people who are on that panel. So I want to take a look at why people do what they do, and in that larger trend, why this particular SEC chairman may be choosing to take this path. So I am not a securities expert. I am not a finance expert. I'm not a markets expert. This is not advice on what you should or should not trade or do not do. What I am an expert in is why people do what they do, and in Geode Blockchain itself. So as a founder of a layer 1 blockchain and a crypto, which is Geode, check it out at geodechain.com, I've got a dog in this fight, right? So I am watching this really, really closely. But I don't want to get caught up in a single headline, although this is a big one. So why is this a big deal? This is a big deal because Uniswap is a decentralized exchange. And up until now, the SEC has generally chosen to go after centralized, or to file suit against centralized exchanges. So this is different. This is decentralized exchange. And what does that mean? That means that there's not really anybody in the middle. So, for example, there's not really anybody like Coinbase is a centralized exchange. They sit in the middle between you wanting to trade this and someone else wanting to trade that. So they are a money services business. They are transmitting. They are having custody of wallets. And that's a very different story when you look at decentralized exchanges. And I don't want to get into the technology of that at this point. One, because I don't feel like I personally understand it deeply enough to really get into it in an authoritative way. But two, because I want to focus you on the bigger trend and where that's going. And I want to zoom out so far that we go back to before crypto. Wow. For some of you were but wee children at the time. So the SEC has largely existed. Their job is to protect investors by figuring out what is a security and what is not. For example, if you have a company, an incorporated company, and you choose to do an IPO and offer stock in your company on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ or whatever, that is a security. It's a piece of your company. It's not good for anything else. It doesn't get you a discount. You can't buy stuff with it. It only exists to give you part ownership in that company. That's it. And there's lots of scams out there. So the SEC, part of their charter is to try to prevent people getting scammed. That's really important. It's incredibly important. It's really, really good. And so it's their job to bring down the regulatory law on anyone who is not following or maybe scamming or in some way. That's an incredibly stupidly simplistic way to think about it, but we're gonna roll with this. Now, prior to crypto's existence, they were focused on stocks and stock-like products. And they were looking at, keeping an eye on hedge funds and places like that. Because fiat crypto is all there was. There were dollars and there were currencies put out by other countries, right? So the US dollar is put out by the United States of America. And the euro was put out by the European Union, and so on and so forth. So these different currencies that people could work with. But what currency people were working with was never really kind of in their wheelhouse, and they never had to worry about it. Well, here comes crypto. Bitcoin comes along, and they can't control it. Bitcoin is, in my own opinion, a currency. Definitely not a security. And it has been labeled as not a security, effectively, I believe. But it's a currency. You can buy stuff with it. You can trade with it. It's a bit of a commodity in that it's a thing that you hold, but it functions as a currency. But it's a currency that's not issued by a country like all the rest of the currencies were. Every other currency in the world, it was issued by a government authority. Bitcoin was not. Uh-oh. There's no Federal Reserve for Bitcoin. Nobody's trying to control inflation or deflation with Bitcoin. There is no centralized authority. It's created out of the software. It exists completely unregulated. Now, to a government organization, this is terrifying because the entire existence of a government organization of any type or any sub-organization is there to wield a power. And they don't like to give up power, and they sure as hell don't not like to be made irrelevant. But over time, as new systems come into existence, the old systems have two choices. They can either adapt or they can become irrelevant. And Bitcoin kind of, and other cryptos as well, similarly, pick one. The fact that you can proliferate them so easily, people can create their own currencies. Oh my God. It suggests that certain government bodies, if not all of them, may be irrelevant or coming into irrelevance. And it's a similar thing that we all face. Even as individuals, none of us want to feel irrelevant. So you have two choices when that starts to happen, when your irrelevance starts to get put in your face. You can either adapt. What does that mean? You can look how the world around you has changed, and you can go, okay, how can I leverage what I used to do to create even more relevance, call it power, some people like that, bring myself back into even more relevance than I had before. Leverage what I used to do, start doing some new things, and put myself back in the center of whatever industry this is. So that's your first choice. You can adapt by changing what you do, changing how you do it, and putting yourself back in a position of even more relevance. Or you can lash out in anger, which is based in the fear of your own demise and your own irrelevance. In the case of government institutions, right, it's the irrelevance of the government institution eventually leads to the shrinking of the government institution, smaller budgets, fewer people, and eventually then just go away. But nobody likes that. They want to fight for their phony baloney jobs and their big budgets. And I'm not beyond the irony that I used to be federal government. I get it. I was there. I saw the wastefulness firsthand. And I saw the irrelevance firsthand. And not all the government entities are irrelevant. Not every sub-organization within any government is irrelevant. But in this day and age, I'm just saying, there are a bunch of them that are or are not as relevant as they think they are. So this is what's happening. What you see are people who had power at a high level, lots of power, begin to recognize their own irrelevance and begin to lash out in fear of that rather than adapt and create more relevance than they ever had before. So this is where you get this, regulating by suing people. So instead of actually clarifying the law, making hard statements, if your coin does this, it's a security. If your coin does this other thing, it's a commodity, right? They could just make that really clear, right? Put out some law, right? Congress could do it. The SEC could do it. The CFTC could do it. They could, but they haven't. So instead, the SEC and CFTC like a tiny bit, but not much. But the SEC just chooses to start suing people. We're going to sue you. We're going to sue you. We're going to sue you. Who are they suing? The biggest players. Coinbase, the 800-pound gorilla of centralized exchanges. Uniswap, the 800-pound gorilla of decentralized exchanges. XRP, God love them. Thanks for fighting that, guys. The big players. Because if they can take them down, they can take the rest of them down. But why do they want to take all these players down? Why do they hate crypto so much? Because they can't control it. And because, more importantly, I would say, it points out how irrelevant certain government organizations may be becoming. And that's your problem. So you get this lashing out in anger. However, at the same time, you've got this long-term trend of increased adoption, increased acceptance, increased interest in crypto worldwide. More and more and more. And the evidence of that is very interesting, and I like to track this. The evidence of this increased adoption and increased acceptance of crypto is seen in big headlines such as spot ETFs, exchange traded funds, spot ETFs being issued for Bitcoin, which the SEC approved. Boy, they didn't want to. Did you read that approval? Good Lord, they were not happy. But they did. They approved them. They approved 11 of them. They're considering an Ethereum ETF, but as you can imagine, they're dragging their feet and they're really trying to avoid that as well. Meanwhile, other countries around the world, UK, Hong Kong, correct me guys, there's probably more, have approved or in the process of approving exchange traded funds or the equivalent in their country. These are stock products. These are traditional stock products that you would buy on the stock market that represent simply the current price of these crypto assets. One day we'll see a Geode ETF. Looking forward to that. Talk to me, y'all. So those are the big ones. You have at least one country worldwide already whom has adopted Bitcoin as their national currency. Talk about acceptance and adoption. That's a big one. You have people, individuals worldwide, who, when they get their paychecks in their native fiat currency, they feel like their fiat is unstable or likely to go down in value, so they're switching out their paycheck immediately for either a stable coin or Bitcoin or pick their favorite crypto, and then starting to pay with that. There are more and more places where you can pay with crypto. There are more and more companies working with Visa and MasterCard to have the ability to have, a Visa card, and you go to the grocery store and you buy your groceries with crypto. This is available right now. Individuals like the freedom that crypto offers. I kind of like that it can't be regulated, right? Because fiat currencies are regularly regulated by the governments that put them out, right? And that's not always a good thing because they don't always do a good job of it. Sometimes they do a good job of it and sometimes they don't. They're trying to keep inflation within certain bounds. Yeah, that's not working that great. They're trying to keep the value of the dollar within certain bounds. And sometimes, because they're human and they're fallible, they don't do a very good job. So the fiat currencies have people regulating them, regulating their value and the economies that they are based on. And the cryptos have no regulation in that way at all. No regulation of their value or of the economies that they're based on. And so people are starting to look at that and think that maybe no regulation is better than bad regulation. Well, for sure. Good regulation is a beautiful thing. But bad regulation, that's not good for anybody. And you can tell when you go to the grocery store right now. A little grocery focused today, aren't I? I must be hungry. So there's this larger trend of increased adoption. And despite all of this just thrashing and tantruming in the courtrooms by the SEC and some other regulatory bodies abroad, they keep throwing tantrums, and yet crypto just keeps getting more and more accepted and more adopted. And that's what's happening. That's the big trend. So this is just one more step along that road, because there was a period of time when the SEC was focused on specific tokens, especially ones that had ICOs in like 2017. They came several years later and started hitting on all of them. So first they were kind of focused on tokens, and then at one point they were focused on exchanges, centralized exchanges, and then at one point they kind of switched and were focused on stable coins for a while, and the tennis ball has bounced somewhere else, and now they're into decentralized exchanges and trying to take them down. Because every segment of this industry that they've gone after, it hasn't really gone very well. Some of them have settled out of court, but you have more and more of them are choosing to fight. And that's very interesting. Uniswap mentioned the other day over on X that they're ready to go. So this is going to be a good fight. Get your popcorn. It's going to be interesting. Well, I believe, and I am not a legal expert, but I believe that Uniswap will ultimately prevail, as will Coinbase continue to prevail in court, as will XRP continue to prevail in court. And we were all going to benefit from that. So it's worth keeping an eye on, and I'll keep keeping an eye on that for you. So let's now zoom in on particular players and why people do what they do. So the SEC has a chairman who is in charge. That's currently Gary Gensler. And it has other people who have roles on that committee, on that commission. Hester Pierce is another one. Shout out. Love what you're doing. Everybody kind of points at Gary Gensler and goes, him, it's all him. Well, yeah, he does wield the most power. But it's not just him. There are other people on that commission. And some of them don't agree with what he's doing. So not everybody who works at the SEC is in agreement with how this is going down. And Hester Pierce is one who really voices her thoughts quite openly. And I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. So why do people do what they do? Why does Chairman Gensler hate crypto so much? Why does Hester Pierce not? They're coming from the same organization. They are seeking to protect investors in the same way. They are seeking to apply the same laws and the same tests. Individuals are in different psychological stages every minute of their lives. And you've heard me talk about this some before, and I'm going to bring it in again because it matters. Chairman Gensler is acting like someone, you would say stage 5, because ideology I don't think so. This is stage 3. This is needs. We're getting back to really core needs. I mean, this is some base level Maslow's hierarchy. The need to feel relevant. The need for esteem from peers, from community. The need to feel like your life is not a waste. And these are needs that we all have, that we can all identify with. And he's being confronted with these issues, these existential issues, at a phase of his life, personal life, in which he may be confronting with the similar issues on the personal side as well as the professional side. It's rough. It's really, really rough. Anyone who works in a political position that is inherently a stage 5 job, it's an ideologically based job. You are focused on ideology, whether that ideology is securities law. It doesn't have to be politics one way or the other. It could be just this subset of the law. That's the ideology. And you can be very focused on that, and you have to be focused on that to do a good job if you work for the SEC. But now in the personal side of your life, you are also moving along this personal journey, experiencing these different stages, which is you're identified with some aspect of yourself. So in stage 3, you're identified with your own needs, and you will do anything to fulfill them. You will hurt anyone. It doesn't matter. You'll be a jerk. You may do illegal things. Not everybody will. But it's very self-focused because your needs aren't being met. Contrast that with Commissioner Pierce, who's in a different phase of life, and I don't know her, would love to. DM me, girl. But appears to be further along, operating more in the stage 6 to stage 8 range. 6 or 8, not 7. So either kind of in the live and let live range or in the purpose-driven range. Now, somebody who's purpose-driven to apply the existing securities laws to actually safeguard consumers is the one who could turn this entire thing around and actually create more relevance for the SEC than they've ever had before. And take this as a leadership example. If your organization is starting to become irrelevant in your industry or in the space that you work in, you can change that. So let's talk about how they could change that. They could change that by actually designing and issuing very specific, very clear guidance. If Congress won't, the SEC can. Now, Congress supersedes the SEC, right? There's hierarchy of power here. The SEC is below Congress. If Congress makes a law, that's the law. The SEC can make a regulation, which is not a law. It's a regulation. It's a little bit different. I'm not an expert, but throw in your opinions here. But they could be very, very clear. If they were to write up ridiculously specific guidance for in what scenarios a crypto is a security, good Lord, we would love that. Everybody would love that because there's all these scenarios. Well, did they take investment? And if they did take investment, who was it from? Was there a contract involved? What did they say to get that investment? Were they hyping the coin or were they hyping there's all these like tiny little what if scenarios, right? Where they could make a flow chart that says this is how you know if your coin is a security, or this is how you avoid being a security, or either way, it doesn't matter. But if they were to do that, if they were to lead the way, Because right now you'll notice nobody is standing up to lead. Nobody's leading. The SEC is not leading. The CFTC is not leading. Congress is not leading. Nobody's leading. So it's this free-for-all of speculation and just filing suit on people. And it's a mess. So if they were to stand up and lead and go, look, here's what we propose as the regulation on when a crypto is a security, period. That's it. Here is a detailed explanation. And if they were to stand up and do that, and then work with Congress to create a law to codify that, and work with the CFTC on when that coin is a commodity, and when that needs to be regulated by them as a commodity, they would have then just put themselves right back in the center as the most relevant organization to all of crypto, at least in the United States. Outside of the U.S., it actually doesn't matter. But in the U.S., they would be the center of attention. Bigger budgets, all that power and everything that government folk love. So that's what I would do. That's what I would do. Put me in charge of the SEC, that's what I would do, except none of their employees are allowed to own crypto. Yeah, none of their employees are allowed to own crypto. That's a different problem and the reason that they have a little trouble hiring. So another indicator of increased adoption. So that's what's going on in my head when I look at this situation. So we've got this long-term trend of increased adoption and acceptance of crypto, which goes with it a long-term trend of currencies not created by governments that cannot be regulated in terms of value or economics by governments. It makes them scared. It makes them feel irrelevant. They lash out. But maybe instead they will choose to create even more relevance for themselves out of this situation. I don't think it's too late for that. And I really, really encourage that. So those are my thoughts. That's where I think it's going. It has everything to do, like, when will this end? This will end when you get not just an SEC chairman, but a majority of the commission who is not in a stage 3 based fear. So when you get people in there in charge and you have the majority opinion is coming from a place of purpose, they could turn this around and actually be a huge help to this industry that is crying out for help and clarity right now. All right, only my opinion. I am not a securities expert. I'm not a finance expert, not a legal expert. If you are, join the conversation. All right, thanks for joining me this time. I think you're caught up on that, and we'll see you next time. Bye.